Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, which also provide you the much important avenue to practice daily answer writing, in the first topic, we are going to analyze the impact on human rights because of the stringent provisions of the Unlawful Prevention Act of 1967. Then, in the second topic, we'll try to analyze the emerging challenges between India and Sri Lanka relations and the way forward which has been provided by the today's editorial. Then, in your simplified section, we'll take up 5 news. We will not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition, keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2026. So, stay tuned. The activist Umar Khalid has moved to the Supreme Court against the Delhi High Court's order rejecting his bail plea under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act case, which is related to his alleged conspiracy behind the 2020 riots which took place in the national capital and shook the consciousness of the country. Keep this in mind that the Act forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of government policies and interventions. The Delhi High Court, while it was giving this particular judgment, also observed that each and every person has right to participate in peaceful protests and also give speeches in the public meeting as part of the fundamental right under Article 19 of the Constitution, which guarantees a person's freedom of speech and expression. And thus, such fundamental right cannot be blatantly curtailed. However, the Delhi High Court also observed that such fundamental right which has been provided to a particular citizen under the Constitution is also subjected to several reasonable restrictions, one of them being that if such fundamental right is actually disrupting the public order. So, for example, if you have made a speech and that speech has led to the disruption of public order in the form of a riot taking place, in that particular case, the fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression can also be suspended through the various legal means. Now, the various critique of this Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967 basically traces its origin and criticize the act by saying that how this particular act has kind of reminiscences of the colonial past. So, for example, when our country was colonized from the year of 1757 to the year of 1947, the British government obviously had a kind of a prime motive, and that was to kind of curb down any dissenting voice against the government. For which purpose? For example, they enacted the Vernacular Press Act of 1878, which was basically enacted under the Viceroyalty of Lytton, who was Viceroy from 1876 to 1880. Under which they said that if there is any newspaper in vernacular languages, basically meaning not in English, in the publishing the newspaper articles in the native languages of our country, and that particular article is criticizing the government of day or creating anti-government feeling, then that particular newspaper will be banned and the printing material will be confiscated on the order of district magistrate. And there will exist no right to appeal against such order which has been passed by the district magistrate. Further, the Britishers enacted the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1908, under which for the first time they used the term unlawful associations to actually curb down such associations who were raising the voice against the British government, like for example Ghadar Party, thus to further curb down the rising nationalist movement of that point of time. In the very same line, they also enacted Seditious Meeting Act 1911 and Defence of India Act 1915, whose draconian provisions were further replicated after the World War ended in the Rowlatt Act of 1919, which basically held that any particular person can be arrested and put on trial for almost 2 years without any particular charges being proved or without any warrant. It was against this Rowlatt Act, because of which the Gandhi created the Satyagraha Sabha. Ultimately, the movement will start, a kind of a nationwide hartal will be called, and that will basically transpire to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre which took place on 13th of April 1919. So when our Indian government came into the power after the enactment of our constitution on 26th of November 1949, it made sure that such freedom of speech and expression is protected by the fundamental law of the land itself under as a fundamental right. Thus, the question arises that what were the circumstances which led the government to create such draconian law of Unlawful Activity Prevention Act in the year of 1967? The answer to that is the various internal security challenges which we faced within the 20 years of our independence. The first and foremost was the rise of separatist movement, such as for example the call or demand of Dravid Nadu by Perrier with the formation of DMK party in the year of 1949. Or the Punjabi Suba movement, which led to the bifurcation of Punjab and creation of Haryana in the year of 1966. Or for example, during the Sino-Indian War or Indian-Chinese War of 1962, China was basically claiming the region of Tawang, which formed the part of Northeastern Frontier Agency or Arunachal Pradesh of today. Now just imagine that there are certain people in India at that point of time who are basically supporting this illegitimate claim of China by exercising their fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression under Article 19 of the Constitution. Don't you think that this would act as a kind of a serious threat to India's sovereignty as well as internal security at that point of time? Then further, the insurgency in the northern eastern states, the ghost of which we even see today, creating various kind of separatist movements, like for example the creation of Nagaland National Council, which was basically fighting a kind of a guerrilla warfare at that point of time, demanding for regional autonomy. The final nail in the coffin was Naxalbari uprising of 1967, which is also considered as the rise of the left-wing extremism, where people led by Charu Mazumdar and Kanu Sanyals, they were basically inspired by the Mao Zedong's idea of agrarian revolution or class-based revolution, where the peasants of Naxalbari regions in the Darjeeling district of West Bengal at that point of time basically kind of raised their voice against the landlord, leading to various kind of riots which took place, thus kind of making the government enact this particular stringent act which had very strict provisions to even curb down the freedom of speech and expression. Keep this in mind that under the Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967, the first organization which was banned was the CPI Marxist-Leninist, which was created in the year of 1969 in the aftermath of this Naxalbari uprising. So, what are the salient provisions of Unlawful Prevention Act 1967? First, let's try to understand what constitutes an unlawful activity. So, the description provided to us by the Act itself, it suggests that any action of an individual or association which intends to bring cession or secession from Indian territory, or which disclaims or questions India's sovereignty and integrity, or it leads to the disruption of harmony or public order, that will be considered as an unlawful activity. Now ask a question to yourself. Does there exist any kind of absolute or legal definition what constitutes sovereignty or integrity of India? Or what constitutes public order basically? So don't you think that by having such ambiguous provisions, there exists a kind of a large discriminatory power in the hand of the government to declare any activity as an unlawful activity? Further, in the 2004 amendment, for the first time, the term terrorism was also included in the provisions of the Act, where the government said that if there exists any organization which is inculcating or including itself in any kind of terrorist activity which is taking place on the Indian soil, then that particular association will be charged under the Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967. Now, which government can actually declare any association as unlawful? As per the section 3 of the Act, only central government can do that. Remember, the provisions of the Act are not only applicable to the citizens of the country but also to the foreign nationals. So, if there exists any foreign national who has committed any terrorist activity on Indian soil, even by residing on a foreign soil, even that person can be prosecuted under the provisions of the Act. Thus, under the Act, there are several organizations which has been claimed to be inculcating or including themselves in terrorist activity on Indian soil, and thus they have been banned under the first schedule. Organizations like, for example, CPI-ML or SIMI, Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, etc. Then there was a 2013 amendment which was brought, which basically included the provision of money laundering in the act as well. Why there was a necessity for that? The reason was that India joined as a 34th member of the Financial Action Task Force in the year of 2010. What is FATF, Financial Action Task Force? It is basically an intergovernmental body which was established by the grouping of G7 countries in the year of 1989, with the major purpose to curb down money laundering and hawala channels, which were basically kind of funding the terrorist activities on various nations. Thus, let's say for example, there is a particular country on the soil of which such illicit funding activities are taking place or terrorist activities are taking place, then such country is actually listed in the blacklist of the FATF. These are the countries where there is taking place serious strategic deficiencies in kind of countering the money laundering and terrorist financing. So if the country is listed on the blacklist, that will basically kind of attract various kind of sanctions by these G7 and G20 countries as well. Some countries which are right now listed in the blacklist are, for example, your North Korea, Iran as well. Very recently Myanmar was also included. Now what is the difference between blacklist and grey list? So let's say there is a country which is kind of facing this problem of serious strategic deficiency in countering money laundering and terrorist financing, but it has an action plan which has been designed by FATF, and that country is trying to apply that action plan, then that country's listing will be improved to the grey list. So when India became a member of FATF in 2010, it also again amended the UAPA Act in 2013 and included the money laundering as one of the offences, under which now if there is any individual or organization which is involved in this process of money laundering and there is an established link of this money laundering to financing any kind of terrorist activity or terrorist group, then such individual or organization can be prosecuted under the provision of this UAPA 2013 as well. Further, this amendment actually extended any such ban on organization for a period of 5 years. Then what are the other changes and the provisions of the acts are? Keep this in mind that first and foremost we'll try to understand the investigation and the enforcement provision of the act. So for example, there exists a section 43A to 43F, which basically provides a special power to the National Investigation Agency and state police to conduct such searches among the state. Does NIA is required to take the state permission or consent for any such search which it is conducting in a particular state if the activity is related to terrorist activity? The answer is absolutely no. The state government's consent is not required at all. Thus it is kind of hinting at the more unitary power here. Keep this in mind that NIA is a statutory body which was enacted or created under the NIA Act of 2008, where it acts as a kind of India's central counter-terrorism enforcement agency, and it was created in the wake of 26/11 Taj attacks which took place. Also, under section 25, the property of such accused can also be seized. Now, what are the arrest and the bail provisions? So, National Investigation Agency NIA can actually detain a person up to 180 days even without filing a charge sheet. Let's try to understand this. So now you guys can actually connect this provision of the act with the Rowlatt Act of 1990. So try to understand this, that let's say for example under the Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Samhita 2023, let's say there is a person who has been accused of committing a crime. If within 1 day the investigation of police is not completed, then the judicial magistrate is authorized to keep this particular person in police custody for a maximum period of 15 days, under which the police will do the investigation and will submit a file to the court that this particular person is accused of this and this crime. Remember that the final accusation that this particular person will be charged with this crime is actually decided by the court itself. However, in the case of UAPA Act of 1967, the police can actually keep a person in the police custody or remand for 180 days or 6 months without filing the charge sheet itself. So don't you think the act has a kind of an overarching bail provision here? Then the section 43D clause 5 actually says that the bail can be denied even if there is a kind of an accusation or prima facie case exists against the accused. Thus, the courts have very limited power here to grant the bail. The penalty which is actually provided under the act is the highest penalties of the nature of capital punishment or life imprisonment. Let's say if there is an association which has been banned under this act for 5 years. So there will take place a kind of a review of this ban on such unlawful association after 6 months by a tribunal which is created under the section 5 of the act, and this tribunal is headed by which judge? A High Court judge. Further amendments were brought in the year of 2019 where it said that now earlier the only an organization was being designated as a terrorist organization if it is committing or participating in act of terrorism, promoting terrorism. Now the act of 2019 amending the UAPA 1967 provided that an individual can also be designated now as a terrorist. Further, the seizure of property which can take place under section 25. An investigating officer must obtain the prior approval of the Director General of Police to seize property that is connected with the terrorism. If such investigation is conducted by an officer of NIA, the approval shall come from Director General of NIA, and that is mandatory. The Act further added that now such investigation can be done not only by the officer up to DSP or ACP level, but also by any such officer of NIA who has a rank of inspector can also investigate such cases. Now, what is the criticism of UAPA? Why it is surrounding with so much of controversy? Why it keep on featuring in the newspaper? The first and foremost is the blame which is put on the act, and that is that it has obviously the colonial hints and it is considered as a draconian law. Why? Because the ambiguity which prevails in the law. For example, the section 15 of the act defines a terrorist activity. It says that any activity will be considered as a terrorist activity if it kind of hampers or threatens the security of the country, the sovereignty of the country, or for example the economic security of the country. Does there exist any legal definition for what constitutes or threatens the unity of India? The answer is no. Does it contains any kind of definition that what threatens the economic security of the country? The answer is no. Thus, such ambiguity in the law actually ends up giving a lot of discriminatory power in the hands of the ruling government. The reason for that is the broad and the overarching provisions of the act, which ends up crippling the voice of a reason. Let's try to understand this. Let's say, for example, you people as students were protesting on the national highway against the discrepancies which has taken place in some state government exam or any such exam which has been conducted by UPSC. Obviously, it does not have any connection with recent events. The point is that you are basically protesting and exercising your fundamental right of freedom and speech and expression under Article 19 of the Constitution on this national highway to kind of gain the traction from media, to gain public attention. But the government will say that because you were kind of barricading the national highway, you ended up disrupting the essential supply of commodities, let's say for example some horticulture crops like tomato and onion, and that has led to threatening the economic security of the region, right? So the economic security has been violated, and thus you have committed an unlawful activity under the act, and now you will be charged under the provisions of this draconian law. Also keep this in mind that such enactment of this particular provisions of the act is not only limited to you committing the particular act. Even the mere assumption or suspicion of it can also lead to your arrest. So there also exists the provision of preemptive arrest and detention, because it doesn't say that only if the act is violating or threatening the unity of India, it says likely to threaten. So it has kind of preemptive arrest and detention, just like how it was there in the Rowlatt Act as well, where you could have been charged and put behind the bars just on the mere assumption that you are basically kind of spreading the anti-government idea. Thus, don't you think that such provisions, the higher bar for the granting bail, such as for example, you can actually remain in detention for a period of 180 days without the police filing any charge sheet, that what are the actual charges against you, it actually acts as an antithetical to the ordinary criminal laws. Because in the ordinary criminal laws, the idea is that bail is the norm and jail is exception. Similarly, all of the provisions which are there and the enactment of it has actually led to several cases of human right violation. So to understand that, we'll actually take up the G. Chakrabarti case. G. Chakrabarti, who was actually put behind the bars under the provisions of UAPA 1967, and he was ultimately released after 7 years. The reason because of that the charges which was put against him, it was not proven in the court, thus leading to the kind of wasting the 7 important and formative year of his life. Don't you think that basically led to kind of human right violation? Human right violations such as, for example, Article 14 right to equality, Article 19 freedom of speech and expression, Article 21 dignified life, or for example Article 22 which basically kind of provide the right for fair trial. And because of this ambiguity and such large scale arrests which take place has actually led to the low conviction rate which exists. Just look up at the headings of the article. The court pull-ups the police for slow investigation in UAPA. Half of UAPA investigation are actually pending for more than 3 years. The chart shows the share of UAPA cases between 2019 and 22 whose investigation have been pending for more than 3 years. Just look at the rising numbers here. The chart 3 here shows the number of persons who were arrested under the UAPA, the person who are charge sheeted, discharged, acquitted and convicted. So these are the number of people who have been arrested in the 5 years period, that is 11,500. Just look at the rate of conviction, that is only 315 people who were ultimately convicted under the act. Thus, also keep this in mind that such draconian provisions lead to the violation of the rights of specifically the marginalized people of the society, the vulnerable section of the society. Because first and foremost, they do not have the legal knowledge. Second, they do not have the economic backing to actually kind of face such a long ordeal of trial in the court. Thus, there has been various judicial precedents. We will also see the kind of more centralization of power through these chronology of judicial precedent. The first was Balchand case of 1978, where the Supreme Court held that bail is the rule and jail is going to be the exception. So only in the extreme cases a person shall be sent to jail. However, in Union of India versus K. Najib case 2021, the Supreme Court held that bail under UAPA is exception, but it shall be balanced by speedy trial by the police. The status of that you guys can see here. Third, V. Gonzalez case 2023. It said that there shall be at least surface analysis of any kind of probative values of accused plea is necessary. So if I am accused under the UAPA Act of 1967 and I am going to the court, at least the court shall see that what is the plea which I am making, what is the argument which I am making, before kind of considering me as a accused or as a prima facie accused of the particular terrorist activity altogether. In Gurvinder Singh case of 2024, ultimately, very recently, the Supreme Court held that actually bail is the exception under UAPA and jail is the rule. So there are certain suggestive measures which has been given over the course of years, which shall be implemented to actually bring the reforms in this particular act to actually kind of safeguard the human rights and the fundamental rights of the people. The first and foremost is by the Law Commission of India Report 2018. It said that if there exists no prima facie case under section 43D of the act, bail shall be given by the court. Justice A.P. Shah Committee 2010 actually suggested for repealing the section 43D clause 5 altogether and said to precisely define what constitutes a terrorist act. Third, the NIA Review Committee 2018 said that there shall be robust protection of accused and he shall be given a kind of right to have basic dignity under the prison. Ultimately, the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy has suggested to introduce pre and post facto judicial and independent oversight for the application of the stringent provisions of the UAPA. Keep all of these suggestions in your mind to write as a way forward in this particular question, and we move forward to the next news, where the article highlights the unresolved issue of the fisheries crisis in the Park Strait and the sovereignty of the Katchatheevu island between India and Sri Lanka, forming an important component of the bilateral relations under the larger component of international relations in the GS2 paper. So, first and foremost, we'll try to understand the historical backdrop of India-Sri Lanka ties to actually understand that what led India ceding the Katchatheevu Islands to Sri Lanka under the Maritime Boundary Treaty, which was signed in the year of 1974. So keep this in mind that Sri Lanka was actually known to us Indians since ancient times, with various names such as, for example, Lankadeep, Anuradhapur or Taprobana, which emerged in the Buddhist texts like, for example, Deep Vamsa and Mahavamsa, etc. The texts which were actually written on the Sri Lankan soil itself. For example, this term Taprobana used for Sri Lanka actually derived its terms from Thamir Barani river, which actually drains in the Gulf of Mannar and originates in the modern day state of Tamil Nadu. The reason for such connection is actually the kind of the origin of Buddhism, which took place on Indian soil, and ultimately it was transported to Sri Lanka from the Indian soil itself. In this context, you guys can recall from your ancient history class the third Buddhist Sangiti or council, which took place in the year of 200 BC, which was actually conducted by the third Mauryan ruler Ashoka, who ruled from 268 to 232 BC. The council, which was actually conveyed at Pataliputra, at that point of time the capital of Magad Empire, and was actually presided by Mogliput Tissa. In this third Buddhist council, Ashoka basically appointed various cultural ambassadors who were called as Dham Mahamatas to spread the ideas of Buddhism across the world, such as, for example, Ashtangika Marg. To Sri Lanka, he actually sent his own son Mahinda or Mahendra, who actually carried the original sapling of Bodhi tree under which Buddha meditated for the span of 49 days and got nirvana or enlightenment. At that point of time, the Sri Lanka's king was Devanam Piya Tissa, who actually permitted Mahinda to create the oldest Buddhist monastery in the soil of Sri Lanka, and that is your Isru Munia temple, which you guys can see in the picture. So tracing from that ancient lineage of Buddhism, even today, Sri Lanka's majority population, that is almost 70%, is actually Buddhist. Then from the 8th to 9th century onwards, especially after the establishment of Chola Empire, the Tamil people also started migrating to the region of Sri Lanka, specifically after the year of 993 C. Why? Because this year basically marked the invasion of northern Ceylon, which is the modern day Jaffna, by a Chola king whose name was Raja Chola. 25 years down the line, in the specific year of 1018 C, Raja's son Rajendra Chola ended up acquiring the complete Ceylon altogether. Thus, there is a kind of a shared historical cultural ties as well, which we share with Sri Lanka, with both Tamil and Buddhist people right now living in the region of Sri Lanka. Keep this in mind that in the modern times, by the arrival of the European forces in the medieval time period, we actually see that the region of Indo-Pacific actually became very important because these were maritime powers, and thus they also tried to establish their control over the region of Sri Lanka. First and foremost, it were Portuguese who captured the Sri Lanka in the year of 1505. Specifically, the name of the person was Lorenzo Almeida. Lorenzo Almeida, who was basically the son of Francisco de Almeida, who is actually considered to be the harbinger of blue water policy in the Indian Ocean. Then, Dutch captured it from Portuguese in the year of 1658. And ultimately, from the Dutch, the Britishers acquired the Ceylon or Sri Lanka of modern day time period in the year of 1802 through a treaty called as Treaty of Amiens. So finally, when in the year of 1947 and 1948, both India and Sri Lanka got independence respectively, Sri Lanka on a specific date of 3rd of February 1948, both countries established strong diplomatic ties on the basis of shared cultural and colonial past. Then in the recent time period, you guys might be observing that how this Indian Ocean has actually become a hotbed for geopolitical tension. The major reason for that is the various global supply chain disruptions which is actually being caused in this particular Indo-Pacific maritime belt, specifically because of the zero-sum game of China. That is basically China's posturing to establish itself as the major controller of the Indo-Pacific Ocean. Why Indian Ocean holds so much of importance to our country? We will see that by learning three important facts. First, Indian Ocean is the third largest ocean which touches the shore of 26 countries. Now keep this in mind that 80% of the world's seaborne trade in the oil specifically and 70% of the world's container traffic actually traverses in this belt of Indo-Pacific. Particularly for our country, 80% of our external trade and 90% of our energy trade actually takes place in this Indo-Pacific belt. This is where the India and Sri Lanka's, the maritime boundary which we share, and in between that this important Pak Strait which we have, which basically connects the Gulf of Mannar in the north to Lakshadweep Sea in the south, that becomes or holds paramount importance because it sits at the heart of Indian Ocean. And thus it provides for various important shipping lanes, which is very important for our country to establish ourselves as a net security provider in the region of Indo-Pacific. Following the line of which, we have also enacted various kind of security initiatives, like for example, security for all and growth for all in the region policy, under which, for example, we basically train the ships as well as navy personals of Sri Lanka, or for example we provide them various important military equipments as well as patrolling vessels to actually ensure the maritime security in the region and to actually ensure the open sea line of communication for kind of free trade which shall take place in this region. All of this India has done under the neighborhood first policy, and we also conduct two important exercises with Sri Lanka. One is the military exercise, that is MIT, and one is the naval exercise, which is Shakti. Now, very recently, to further strengthen its security positions in the region, India and Sri Lanka also started Colombo Security Conclave, which also includes two important countries in the Indian Ocean regions, them being Mauritius and Maldives. So these are the important initiatives to actually ensure maritime security which India and Sri Lanka has taken together. Our ties are not only limited to these defense but also kind of expands to the economic convergence, where India is the largest trading partner of Sri Lanka, as well as Sri Lanka is the second largest trading partner of India in the specific region of South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which was created in the year of 1985. And currently consists of 8 countries. Countries like, for example, Maldives, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Afghanistan and India, MBBS Spain. You guys can learn that. But can anybody comment in the comment box? Where is the secretariat, permanent secretariat of SAARC, where it is located? Also, with Sri Lanka, we actually have a kind of an extensive trade. So we have this data for June 2025. Where the export from India to Sri Lanka were in various important fields like for example ship, boat and floating, petroleum products, cotton fabrics. We were also importing spices, fresh fruits, etc. from them. Through this trade, remember, India has a huge positive balance of trade of profit of around $340 million. Thus, we have established various major transshipment hubs for our country in Sri Lanka, such as for example, almost 48% of our cargo actually passes through this Pak Strait. leading to positive balance of trade as well as positive balance of payment. At the same time, if we refer to the FICCI kind of estimation, it says that how India and Sri Lanka has huge trade potential of approximately $100 million in diamonds and refined petroleum. Thus, our investors of our country has actually made major investments by Indian companies in Sri Lanka. Like for example, the Trincomalee port which we are actually developing as a kind of a counter to the Hambantota port which has been taken to the lease by China. Or for example, creation of Jaffna to Colombo railway track, or various kind of oil gas fields which are being controlled by ONGC and Indian Oil Corporation. India and Sri Lanka has also very recently decided to ramp up the defense, energy and trade ties as well. But there has been turn of events because of the economic crisis which Sri Lanka faced, the balance of payment crisis which was faced by Sri Lanka. For example, what happened that back in the year of 2021, there came a time period when Sri Lanka's balance of payment, the kind of the amount which it had to pay for the import which it was doing, it actually came down to $1.4 billion only. So it was kind of a reenactment or repetition of the mistake which we did, leading to the balance of payment crisis which we faced in the year of 1991, ultimately which led to the LPG reforms, correct? For example, the Sri Lanka's debt at that point was around $4 billion. To pay that, it only had $1.4 billion. What basically traversed this particular economic crisis which ultimately led the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to actually flee the country altogether? The first and foremost was the poor sort economic policies, where for example, even though Sri Lanka was heavily reliant on fertilizer for its agriculture productivity, it completely shifted to organic farming. As well as there were various large scale tax concessions which were provided to large corporate houses at that point of time because of the issue of crony capitalism. So the idea is that at the one point of time when you are giving these tax concessions, when your agriculture productivity is declining, so obviously you are not able to export that much, the revenue for the government has declined, your forex reserves are declining. What Sri Lanka did, it basically tried to utilize further forex reserve to actually kind of release the dollars into the economy because it wanted to appreciate the Sri Lankan rupee. The idea was that as the price of the Sri Lankan rupee will actually increase, the import will become lesser. There will be impetus on domestic industry, but you are import reliant for various critical minerals, like for example fossil fuel. You don't have your own petroleum production capacity. Just like India, we are 85% reliant on fossil fuels from other country. Similarly, Sri Lanka was also. But now you don't have enough forex reserves to actually pay for that. Further, if there is any chance of improving your forex reserve, that might have taken place from the tourism. But then there was the pandemic effect. There was a rampant decline in the tourism which had taken place. Also, in light of all of this, there took place the political corruption where there was delay in seeking aid from IMF. Rather, the government of Sri Lanka at that point of time fell in the hands of China's debt trap diplomacy. Where, for example, China has taken Hambantota port for 99 years of lease. So obviously, it is not giving any kind of immediate returns to Sri Lankan economy. In this context, remember how India came for the aid of Sri Lanka, which has also been recognized by the Sri Lanka's Prime Minister very recently, where we extended the line of credit up to $4 billion. We basically, through the use of the financial club, Paris Club, which has been asked in your prelims examination as well, we created a $3 billion bailout package from IMF for Sri Lanka. We actually swapped $400 million currency with them. The Export and Import Bank of our country provided $55 million facility to finance fertilizer imports. We also provided $500 million for fuel credit line. The State Bank of India provided $1 billion of essential commodity credit facility. 26 tons of drug and medical supplies were provided. So in this line, we can say that yes, indeed, the Indian-Sri Lankan relations have obviously significantly improved in the current regime. However, the today's editorial highlights that there are certain issues which still prevails. One of that major issue is the issue of bottom trawling, where the Indian vessels carry mechanized bottom trawling in the Pak Strait. So you guys might be hearing about this term very repeatedly. The question arises, what is this bottom trawling? Let's try to get into the crux of that. So the idea is that let's say for example, here is a ship. Now what happens that these Indian vessels, mechanized Indian shipping vessels, they go into the waters of Sri Lanka. So obviously the exclusive economic zone, which as per UN clause extends up to 200 nautical miles. However, this Park Strait is, the width of the Park Strait actually varies from 60 to 130 kilometer only. So don't you think that there are certain areas where there is not such very well defined maritime boundary between the two countries? So the Indian vessels actually traverses to the Sri Lankan waters. Bottom trawling has been banned by Sri Lanka since 2017, but it is not banned in our country. So the Indian mechanized vessels, when they go into the Sri Lankan waters, what they do, they basically kind of lay down a large fishing net by using kind of fiber wires, which warps basically, which basically weighs more than 5 million tons. So they basically end up catching a lot of fish. Keep this in mind, almost 95% of them is called as bad catch or the catch which was not required, leading to the kind of the huge destruction of the aquatic biodiversity. At the same time, this 5 million ton weighing warp, when it lays or touches the kind of the floor of the ocean, it actually releases various kind of plumes, thus polluting the water altogether, damaging the coral beds, shrimp habitats and depleting the fish stock. Major reason for that is the depletion of near shore resources that had led to the fishing in the contested water, ultimately creating the issue of livelihood and conservation at odds. Second major issue is the ceding of Katchatheevu. So keep this in mind that this island, which was ceded to Sri Lanka in the year of 1974 through the maritime boundary agreement which was signed between India and Sri Lanka, this island is actually barren and only extend up to half a square mile as per the today's article. But there are various regional political parties who kind of play the vote based politics and try to claim that the central government kind of gifted away this very important island to Sri Lanka. Idea is that this is a barren island. There exists only St. Anthony Church, which is actually, there takes place an annual festival which is visited by the fishermen of Tamil Nadu, ceded to Sri Lanka through the Indira Gandhi Bandaranaike Agreement of 1974. The idea is that when India was actually ceding this Katchatheevu island to Sri Lanka, first and foremost we followed the good neighbor policy to actually kind of create more strategic ties with Sri Lanka. And at the same time, India also kind of augmented that there existed weak legal standing to actually put our claim on the island by drawing a kind of a precedent from an earlier case, that was the International Court of Justice ruling in the case of UK-France case of 1953, where there was a disputed island between France and UK. The ICJ basically ruled in the favor of UK, even though the France was showing that I have historical precedent or claim over the island. The UK was basically having a kind of more established administrative jurisdiction there. Same was in the case of Sri Lanka over Katchatheevu, and that's why we ceded to them. But also we ended up establishing strategic ties with them. We also followed various important international principles, like for example Article 123 of UN clause, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, where it is said that cooperation should be established in semi-enclosed seas, such as for example Pak Bay and Gulf of Mannar. We also took a kind of an example from Baltic Sea Fisheries Convention, where there exists a specific quota to conserve the resources, and the Food and Agriculture Organization's Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, where it has basically said that bottom trawling shall be completely unacceptable. So on the line of this, the article has basically provided us several important way forward. First and foremost is that there shall be a resolution for distinction between artisanal fishers and trawler operators. Then we can also basically enact a European quota system to limit the fishing rise to a specific day or seasons by the Tamil Nadu small fisher. Also, further requirement is to actually sensitize the community through the use of media by actually showcasing that how India accepted the Tamil refugees in the time of LTTE crisis, as well as the aid which we have provided to them recently. Then we can actually promote the deep sea fishing in India's exclusive economic zone. Further, for economic integration, we can actually develop the Trincomalee-Batti-Kalwa belt for tourism and trade, thus kind of creating a single economic zone that has been suggested by various economists to create a single economic zone of South India-Sri Lanka zone, and to further enhance the Buddhist diplomacy by creating various pilgrimage circuits. So keep this way forward in your mind, attempt this question, and we move forward to the next news, where the article basically highlights the kind of issues which are actually being faced by the automobile makers of our country. What is the context of the article? The article says that how, even though India and China has signaled a kind of a relaxation in the ties with the recent Tianjin Declaration, which took place under the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's meeting, which took place in China, the China continues its stranglehold over the export of rare earth magnets, with applications made by Indian automakers to actually source the key minerals from that country continues to hang in the fire. This has forced them to actually procure either entirely built motor parts and components from China and Vietnam, which will obviously is impacting what? It is adversely impacting the automobile prices, so they are going up, because instead of bringing up the critical minerals and making our own domestic components here, that could have made the kind of reduce the input cost. But now, because China is not supplying the rare earth elements to these automobile makers, the input cost has increased, and that has also ended up kind of increasing the cost of the automobiles, as well as it has reduced the manufacturers' domestic value addition percentages, and thus the incentives which are available under the production linked incentive scheme, they are not able to avail that. Let's first try to understand the China's dominance in the critical mineral as per the graph which was provided to us by Hindu yesterday. According to which, if you look at the country-wise share in the global reserves of the rare earth, China has almost 48% share, followed by 23% of Brazil and 7% by India. If we look at the country-wise share of estimated global mine production of rare earth, China ended up producing almost 2/3 of the total rare earth in the last 5 years, followed by 13%, that is USA. Just look at India's global share, that is 0.9%, even less than 1%. Next, if you look at the major exporters of rare earth, just look at China. The global share, the share in the global export exists at around 28%, followed by 21% Malaysia and 15% USA. So the idea is that China has such huge dominance when it comes to rare earth elements, and thus it is basically creating or impacting our country. How? First and foremost, in our country we have limited production capacity. So the today's article itself says that how we are basically producing rare earth magnets in India that will end up taking at least 3 to 4 years. The rare earth magnets, which are basically kind of an essential component for the creation of automobile. The major reason for that is, first and foremost, we have lack of resources. So for example, recently you guys might have read in the newspaper that how we have discovered lithium reserves in the Riyasi district of Jammu and Kashmir. But that is the only known source of lithium in our country. The second major issue is that even though this particular research or kind of the exploration was made years back, there has not taken place till now any such scientific exploration there and extraction of these resources. Major reason for that is it will require long gestation period, huge technological upgradation, large scale capital investment, and that itself deters basically the investment which shall be made by the private sector. Then for the further extraction and the utilization of such resources requires the skilled manpower. In this case, you guys can recall India Skill Report 2025. 86% of Indians who does not have vocational training at all. Thus, in the lack of resources, lack of private investment, we are basically reliant on import, thus purchasing the complete parts and components from China. When we are doing that, the input cost is increasing, and thus the actual cost of such automobile is going to increase. Also, we have a festive season around. Thus, we have a price sensitive market. The cost of automobile will shoot up, leading to what? Negative balance of trade and balance of payment. In this case, recall the huge trade deficit which we already have with China. Further, when we are unable to bring only the raw material and create value addition in the domestic economy, these industries were basically seeking the kind of the subsidies which were provided by the government, the incentives which were provided by the government for the domestic value addition component. So if that has declined, because now you are basically purchasing the whole component altogether or the whole automobile altogether, now these countries will get less incentive under the production linked incentive scheme, further disincentivizing domestic production. Thus, India is actually now seeking to procure rare earth sample from Myanmar's KI rebels, to obtain the rare earth sample from them, to act as an alternative supply of a strategic resource, right, which is tightly controlled by China. So the Ministry of Mines has actually asked the state-owned enterprises, the PSUs of our country, to explore collecting and transporting sample from mines in the northeastern Myanmar, which is actually kind of controlled by the Kachin Independence Army. So in this particular context, let's try to understand what is production linked incentive scheme. The scheme which was first launched in the response to the pandemic to create kind of a domestic manufacturing capacity. In this particular case, what the government did? The government discarded the traditional input-based subsidy. Rather, it said that you start creating or manufacturing products domestically in India. And as the incremental sale will increase over the year, the government is going to provide you 4 to 6% average incentive. However, it varies. So for example, it is as low as 1% for electronics and technology product, and as high as 20% for critical key starting drugs and certain drug intermediaries. The scheme basically applies to 14 key sectors, like for example, large scale electronics manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, automotive, drone creation, etc. Incentive is being given by the government, 4 to 6%. That will end up offsetting the higher cost of manufacturing in our country. And in the budget, the government has almost allocated $1.02 billion or 8,885 crore allocation. The idea is to create further champion units to actually increase the competitiveness of Indian products in the international market. If we look at the achievements of the PLI scheme as provided to us by the PIB, as of August 2024, total investment which was realized in various sectors, 14 key sectors, by the use of this PLI scheme was around in the range of 1.5 lakh crore, leading to the domestic production value of 12.5 lakh crore, with generating employment of 9.5 lakh direct and indirect jobs, and thus kind of significantly contributing into India's export, which with contribution in the 4 to 5 years being 4 lakh crore, thus kind of pushing India more closer to the idea and objective of becoming a 1 trillion foreign export economy by the year of 2030. But if you guys can recall that this year they asked a question in the mains examination asking you people to actually review the PLI scheme. The reason for that was because such review was actually available in the month of December through an RTI Act, that is Right to Information Act 2005, and that was seeked and published by the Indian Express in the month of December 2024, also in detail covered in your Analyst itself, where it basically asked the government to provide them the data under the Right to Information Act. The government said that the 75% of the job which we have created, that has been limited only in 3 sectors: food, pharma and mobile phones. In textile sector, which basically constitutes large, micro, small, medium enterprises, only 33% of the target was matched. In the various emerging sectors, sunrise sectors, like for example ACC, there existed long gestation period, and that's why the government said that they have not been able to put that much of finance there, and there is not such job creation there. Also, various sectors actually kind of provided the data that there exists slow rate of adoption for new technologies altogether. So out of all the jobs which were created as of June 2024, the data provided to the Indian Express through RTI, it said that the 16.2 lakh direct jobs which we have targeting under the PLI scheme, only 36% of that, or 5.84 lakh jobs, we have been able to create till now. And obviously just look, 3 important sectors which has created almost 75% of the jobs. Thus, the government stand was, when this particular report was published, the government said that see, we have achieved the production and sale of almost 8.6 lakh crore in the span of 4 years till 2025. We have also catalyzed private investment up to 1.03 lakh crore. The prime beneficiaries of such production linked incentive schemes are the micro, small, medium enterprises ranging up to more than 150. Also, because of such increase in domestic production, we have been able to do import substitution. So 60% import substitution has taken place in the telecom sector. Further, the government is saying that when we are saying to increase the domestic production capacity, Why the industries will increase the production unless and until there is also an equal and matching demand by the consumer. So the government said that because of the K-shaped recovery which has taken place in various industries after the pandemic effect, because of that there does not exist huge demand among the consumers. They are not demanding, so that's why the industries are not doing that much of domestic production as well, because of this low consumer demand. However, the government said that we have brought various initiatives, various reforms to further augment the PLI scheme. Like for example, zero defect, zero effect policy. We are signing free trade agreement with various countries. So under this free trade agreement, let's say for example UK FTA which is under negotiation. So the government is saying that when we will kind of create the product will be of zero defect. So it will create the competitiveness of the Indian product in the UK market under the FTA. Then further to promote startups in sunrise sector, we have created funds for them. We are further promoting research at the grassroots level under the Anusandhan National Research Foundation to create such laboratories, technological upgraded laboratories specifically in the state universities. We have also incentivizing the people, the kind of the industries to actually kind of create more employment through employment linked incentive scheme, providing 15,000 rupees to the employee as well as 3,000 rupees to the employer. Then design linked incentive scheme has been launched, and further we are actually increasing the skill set of the people, providing them vocational training under the Kaushal Vikas Yojana of 4.0. This could have been an idle review of PLI if you were writing the mains examination. So keep all of these points very dear to you. We move forward to the next news, where the Himachal Pradesh has claimed that it has become a fully literate state. So what is a fully literate state? What is the context of the news? So the Himachal Pradesh Chief Minister has announced that how Himachal Pradesh has become a fully literate state with a literacy rate of, keep this in mind, 99.30%, and this is as per the claim by the Himachal Pradesh Chief Minister, it is the highest literacy rate in our country. Till now, keep this in mind, only 5 states and union territories actually claim that they have become a fully literate state. The states and UT being Goa, Ladakh, Mizoram and Tripura. But none of them actually boast 100% literacy. So how they basically call themselves as a fully literate state? What is the literacy as per the Ministry of Education in our country? Let's try to understand that first. So Ministry of Education says that let's say there is a person and this person is able to read like me. I am also writing here. I can compute with comprehension. I can read a paragraph. After doing that, if I can identify, understand and create along with critical life skill, like for example, I can use mobile, so I have a digital literacy. I know the calculation that how much money is there in my account, how much money I should invest in some fields, so I have a financial literacy. That itself constitutes that I am a literate person now, so congratulations. Also, the Ministry of Education says that if there is any state, like for example Goa, Ladakh, Mizoram, Tripura and now Himachal Pradesh, who has achieved 95% literacy, then that particular state has achieved full literacy. This was the idea to achieve this full literacy, for which purpose the government launched an Ullas program, which was launched in 2022 to achieve 100% literacy across country by the year of 2030 to actually also achieve a Sustainable Development Goal 4, which aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education. For which purpose the government basically launched the literacy program for people over the age of 15 years who may not have attended school, people like me. So for people like me, there are also provisions under the National Education Policy 2020, which basically says that the adult education initiatives shall be taken to achieve 100% literacy. So under this Ullas program, the adult learners more than the age of 15 years like me who are illiterate, these adult learners are taught basic reading, writing, mathematics, like for example addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, board mass, that a child in school shall learn up to the class of 3. So that they can actually apply this learning to read and measure time, make sense of the calendar, use currency notes and checks, and also they can safely make digital transactions through unified payment interface. This is the idea. If we refer to the data which has been provided to us by the Census 2011, it tells us that according to the census, if there is any person aged 7 and above who can read and write with understanding in any language, it was considered literate. So the literacy rate at that point of time for men was 80.9% and for female was 64%. The adult literacy aged 15 and above was around 69%. The literacy rate for tribal women as per Census 2011 was 49%. If we refer to the Periodic Labour Force Survey 23-24 calculation, the national literacy rate was hovering around 77%. So does there exist any such legal and constitutional mandate which basically kind of enforces the government of the day to actually kind of create such programs like Ullas program to ensure education across the country? The answer is yes. The first and foremost is the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act of 2002, where we amended the constitution and provided that there shall be free and compulsory education provided by the state to all children between the age of 6 to 14 years as the state may determine. Then we further amended Article 45 of the Constitution, which became that now there shall be kind of a directive principle to state policy, so not implemented in the code. Early childhood care and education for all children until they complete 6 years, to 0 to 6 years. Then there is a fundamental duty under Article 51A clause K, that the duty of every citizen who is a parent or guardian, so not me, to provide opportunity for education between the age of 6 to 14 years. Following this amendment and the provisions and DPSP, the government enacted Right to Education Act 2009, which provided legal entitlement of quality education between the age of 16 to 14 years, thus implementing the principle of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan 2001, which is, remember, is a centrally sponsored scheme applied by obviously Ministry of Education to provide useful and relevant elementary education for children between the age of 6 to 14 years. So that is basically the grade 1 to grade 8. The Act also says that there shall be creation of a primary school within a 3-kilometer radius of every habitation. It also provides residential primary school for girls specifically from marginalized communities, SC, ST, OBC. These schools are called as Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalaya. And the Act specifically says to improve the pupil-teacher ratio 30:1 for primary and 35:1 for upper primary. Other such initiatives in the past has been the center and several state ran program targeting literacy among farmers and women, 60s, 70s. Then National Literacy Mission ran from 1988 to 2009. National Adult Education Program was launched in 1978 and Sakshar Bharat or Literate India Mission ran from 2009 to 18. So remember this chronology, this can appear in your prelims examination. We move forward to the next news, where we are going to learn about several new initiatives which has been launched by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. What does the news say? The news say that the Union Tribal Affairs Ministry launched a beta version of Adi Sanskriti. What is Adi Sanskriti platform? It is basically a digital platform to showcase various kind of tribal art forms and heritage and create an economic value for them. So to preserve this cultural heritage for the future generation as well as to create economic livelihood for the tribal people. The ministry says that how it has been envisioned to become the world's first digital university to preserve and promote the culture and knowledge of tribal communities. So the platform will have an online marketplace, opening up a digital market for the products which has been made by the tribal artisans. Under this Adi Sanskriti platform, there are 3 initiatives. Let's learn about them one by one. First is Adi Vishwavidyalaya, which is a digital tribal art academy, under which 45 immersive courses on tribal dance forms, crafts and music has been created. Second, Adi Sampada, which is a socio-cultural repository, under which 5,000 curated documents on paintings, tribal clothing, tribal textiles, all of that has been created. Third is Adi Heart. Adi Heart, which will basically act as a digital marketplace for the tribal dance forms, various crafts, music, paintings, textiles. And this is connected to the government's e-marketplace as well as TriFed. Also recently, the government has launched another initiative related to the tribal people to kind of showcase their cultural heritage, preserve them and kind of integrate them with the larger national economy, and that is Adivani initiative, which is a mobile application to translate tribal languages. So UPSC can give you a prelims statement where it can ask, what is Gondi, Bhili, Santhali and Mundari? These are basically the tribal languages which this Adivani platform is able to translate at this stage. Okay? Ultimately, there was another news related to research fellowship which is being provided for the tribal people. This is called as National Fellowship for Scheduled Tribes, NFST. On the very same page. What is NFST and why it has been in the news? The research scholars from scheduled tribe communities across the countries has actually kind of reported month-long delays which are taking place and various kind of irregularities in the disbursement of funds under this NFST or National Fellowship for Scheduled Tribe, which is basically a scholarship program administered by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. The major reason for that is, just look, the kind of the low gross expenditure on research and development which our country does, considering it to be one of the lowest in the world. Which in that particular year where the report was published by the News 18, it said that it is 0.65%. That was 3 years back. Now you guys might be thinking that we have kind of overcome that. No, even if you look at the last budget 2025, the allocation was between 0.7 to 0.72% only. Look at the expenditure which is being done by Brazil, China or Germany in that case, for example, in the GRD per capita ratio. Also, how India spent our research and development budget. So if we look at that, it is channeled through major scientific agencies. Almost 31% actually goes to DRDO, 19% to Department of Space and 11% to the Indian Council of Agriculture Research. Then in the various emerging field of science and technology, for example, ICMR, Department of Biotechnology, or for example, Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the percentage is not as up to defense and space, which almost constitutes 50% of the total budget altogether. Look, the percentage which we share in health, 18%, defense 17%, agriculture 12%, space almost 8%. When it comes to industrial production and technology, it is only 10%. Now try to connect it with the kind of the low rare earth elements which we have, the low gross expenditure on research and development as well. Look at the number of patents which are filed in India. They have been consistently increasing in the last few years. But obviously, if we compare ourselves to China and USA, we almost secure 1/4 or 1/3 less number of patents than them. This low expenditure on research and development also basically transpires to the kind of irregularities in the funding of NFST. So keep these points in your mind, keep the initiatives in your mind, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll try to learn several important agreements which has been signed in the context of the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. What is the context of the news? The context is that over the past 8 weeks, the conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo has actually seen two major developments. On June 27, the bordering country of DRC, Rwanda, actually signed a US brokered peace agreement in Washington DC. Then on July 19, the Congolese government, the government of DRC, and M23 rebel group actually signed a ceasefire deal which took place in Doha, and that was mediated by Qatar at that point of time. However, even after signing the deal, just 1.5 months down the line, the M23 has actually resumed its offensive, undermining the peace objectives in DRC altogether. Why there exists such a war in Democratic Republic of Congo? First and foremost, there exists a very important mineral-rich region of Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where it is minerally rich in various important critical rare earth elements like cobalt, gold, diamonds and tin. So there exist approximately more than 120 plus militia groups in DRC who are trying to control these mineral-rich Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And this division of militia has actually taken place on ethnic lines, as well as there is a specific group that is basically the Congolese Tutsis group, which is basically kind of the refugee of the genocide which was committed on the people of Rwanda at that point of time in 1994, who basically migrated or acted as refugee in the region of DRC. The state polity has been defunct, has been corrupted, leading to weak state authority and underfunded national army which is called as FARDC. Then there is obviously interference by other strong powers Like for example, funding of this M23 rebel group is actually taken by the Rwanda. And this M23 group comprises of nothing but the Congolese Tutsis group who were actually prosecuted during the Rwandan genocide of 1994. Why Rwandan genocide took place is a very complicated history, so we will not go there. We are reading it in the context of prelims examination. You need to remember two important agreements. First is Washington Agreement. So this was a peace agreement between DRC and you can see DRC here on the map, as well as Rwanda. So they basically came together and signed an agreement, and this was brokered by USA. So the idea was to have a kind of a mutual respect for territorial integrity and end to support for the armed groups. Like for example, the Panchsheel Agreement, which was signed in 1954 between India and China, to create a kind of a joint security coordination mechanism between two countries. DRC's leadership was very happy with the US entry. Why? Because it meant that there will be end to illicit mineral trade as well as security assistance will be provided. The question which shall come in your mind is that why USA, a capitalist country led by that to Donald Trump in today's time, is actually so much interested in the kind of ending the war which is taking place in DRC. The reason for that is economic only. DRC contains 70% of the global cobalt reserves and is the largest producer of cobalt in the world. Cobalt, which is a critical component to actually create chips, semiconductor chips. Then there was a Doha Agreement. Now it is mediated by Qatar, and this took place between DRC and M23, where there was a declaration of principle to actually kind of impose immediate ceasefire and have a peace agreement. And M23 actually had agreed to withdraw from the regions which it had seized. However, it has again kind of reinsured the initiative. Now keep this in mind that there is a very important Congo river which traverses DRC. Now just comment in the comment box, it can be your geography question for prelims examination, that this particular Congo river traverses through which countries in the continent of Africa. And we move forward to the last news of the day, where we are going to learn about some important basics about the census exercise which is going to start now. So India's next census will be conducted in 2027 after a delay of 6 years. And this census which we will conduct in 2027 is actually going to include many firsts. What are the first? For the first time, it will be conducted on digital method. Second, first time people will actually have the option of self-enumeration. How many members are in my family? I can count and I can tell you. Third, members of individual caste will be counted for the first time since 1931. And all the buildings across India will be geotagged. What is geotagging? It is the process of marking longitude and latitude coordinates, right? So that is basically the buildings will be marked that okay, on which particular latitude and on which particular longitude it actually lies on the geographic information system map, thus creating a kind of a grid surface on the earth for identifying a specific location, thus giving a particular building a kind of a locational identity which can be pinpointed with accuracy. Some basics about census. Is there a text in our country which first mentioned the census? Yes, Arthashastra by Kautilya. The first time the mention of a detailed census data about a city is actually the city of Agra, and that has been mentioned in Ain-e-Akbari by Abul Fazl. The first complete census of the city under the British rule was conducted in the city of Dhaka by Henry Walter. The first non-synchronous census took place in 1872 under Lord Mayo. And first synchronous census 1881 was conducted by W.C. Plowden, and at that point of time the viceroy was Ripon. Keep this in mind. Currently, the decennial census is conducted under the Census Act of 1948, and it is a union subject under Article 246 of the Constitution, which is conducted by the Office of Registrar General, who works under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Okay? So the population census has been conducted since 1872, first under Lord Mayo. This will be the 16th such exercise. So a range of data will be included: your demography, religion, language, literacy, education, what economic activity you do. The fertility of the country will also be calculated to calculate the total fertility ratio, TFR. The Indian population was 1.2 billion. So you guys can recall here the estimate which has been made by the World Population Report 2023 of the United Nations. There will be approximately 34 lakh enumerators which will use their own smartphones for collecting the data. So keep all of this important information in your mind, and with this we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.